Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Wednesday, December 18th, 2024, and today we're going to talk about, is no-till more economical than tillage? How to find farm jobs, and how to dry greens after you wash them. So let's do it. All right, so welcome to Wednesday, everyone. I hope it is cracking along nicely. I have been on a mission to get the fences and some of the mini wild areas I have around my farm cleaned up a bit these last couple of weeks. It's not very interesting to talk about, and I've already expressed my love of cleaning up the farm, but that's what I'm up to. A little bit. I fear I'm not going to get as much cleaned up as I would like, just given the weather lately, but also like the sunlight. But I'm certainly going to give it the old college try, even though I never finished college, so maybe I could try to find a better phrase for that. Anyhow, nothing like going into a new season with a cleaned up farm and a winter list mostly finished. So that's the goal. All right, so I am still catching up on Patreon questions, getting ready for the new year. I love all the questions I get there, so please, Patreon members, keep them coming in the December show thread. The more the merrier. It's genuinely it just makes my job easier and helps me to know what you all are interested in hearing about when you all choose the topics. So don't be shy. All right, so Patreon member Tom Beatty asked last month, quote, having worked with both tillage and no-till systems, how do the economics compare? Each has inputs that add to operating costs, but is there a scale where one becomes more profitable than the other? If so, does the pendulum eventually swing back at some point on the operational size/scale continuum? End quote. Okay, this is a great question, Tom. Love it. So for a little background, I learned to farm on a very environmentally conscious tillage farm, meaning they tilled, but were really smart about when and how and to what depths. They added a lot of composted horse manure and some biodynamic preps as well, along with a lot of cover cropping. And I'm really glad I got that education. Honestly, it has served me really well over the years. I know when and how to till properly to not cause further compaction when, for instance, starting a new garden. I know how to cultivate efficiently and effectively where needed. I learned stale seed bedding and mulching techniques and cover crop management. I also understand the art of dry farming, so I can use that around my farm for certain crops. So a lot of good came from that experience, and I wouldn't trade it for the world. But the other thing it taught me was how much more labor gets poured into a tillage system than a no-tillage system. And if not labor, then machinery. So I can't break these numbers down for everyone because everyone's situation will be different, but I can break down how the math works out for me. You can decide if it makes sense for you. All right, so I own a BCS walk-behind tractor and could run a straight-up tillage farm if I so chose. And it would be cheaper upfront, but it would be more expensive in labor. Here's how that works. So for the sake of argument, we'll do a garden plot in deep compost mulch. Think of it like this. On the high end, I spend about $85 per bed to get it set up with compost and labor. So that's like $75 for a yard and a half of compost, plus $10 for the labor, both of which are probably high, but let's just roll with that. So that's a high cost of about $8,500 per 100 beds for labor and compost. Now, because I still spend money on compost and amendments, and there is still labor to set up a tillage bed or plot, I'm spending less money, but I'm still spending something probably closer to $30 a bed. So that would be like $25 for a half a yard of compost, plus $5 in labor and fuel, depending on how the compost was spread. So more like $3,000 per 100 beds to get them set up and ready to plant, depending on how much compost you are using and etc. On the surface, that seems like a savings of $5,500 to go the tillage route, but that financial advantage of tillage is reduced in the upkeep. Those non-tillage beds are set up for 2 years and only require about half or less of the compost every year or two, and almost no weed upkeep. So the upkeep there is about, well, half is too much, but let's say it's half as much as it costs to start the beds. So $4,250 every other year, or $2,125 per year, which again is for labor and compost. You don't have to keep track of these. I'm just saying these numbers if you want to. For those tillage beds, you will have to account for at least 1 hour of labor per crop per season for cultivation, including that very first season. That would be at least 2 cultivations per crop per season. You follow? Generally have to cultivate a crop in bare soil at least twice to keep the weeds down. So you set up the beds at $3,000, but at what? $15 per hour is the bare minimum of what you should pay yourself. Well, depending on the number of crops, that could be as much as 200 crops or 250 or more. So that would mean $3,750 in labor just managing weeds, and that doesn't account for additional compost additions or fuel or maintenance or anything like that. Right now, since I'm going to assume you're not standing there with pen and paper, and if you are, then you're a true nerd, but the cost per season for a tillage farm in year 1 is less by about $1,750 than the no-tillage route. Again, $8,500 for 100 no-till beds versus $66,750 for 100 tillage beds in year 1. But the yearly upkeep is about $1,500 less for no-tillage farm per year than the tillage farm. That would be $2,125 for no-till upkeep starting in year 2 and $3,750 for tillage upkeep. So that's where the pendulum swings back, to use Tom's phrase. In other words, the initial year can cost more for the no-till farm, but the yearly management is less for no-tillage and recoups the difference in less than 2 seasons. Now, this is the math on my farm, not yours. I don't know what equipment you're using. I don't know what your cost of compost is. Your farm will work out differently without question, depending on what tools you already own, how much, if anything, your compost costs, etc. But also keep in mind, in a tillage situation, there are other costs that are hard to quantify, like that the cultivation labor is happening in the dead of summer when you're tired and it's hot and you have a million other things that need attention or that you'd rather, frankly, be doing. Like, what is the value to you of not having to work until dark when you could be hanging out with your kids or your friends or your partner, enjoying some fishing or, in my case, some soccer? Because the compost mulching can take place over the winter, cultivation cannot. What about crop success and disease management? What about erosion from rain and wind? Differences in irrigation costs, mechanical upkeep. Now, different systems have different costs, and there are cultivation tools that reduce labor but cost money, so you will have to do these numbers for yourself. But to me, on our scale, it really comes down to that labor part. And although I'm thankful, as all get out, to have had the education in tillage that I have no desire to return to spending the majority of my time cultivating. Great question, Tom, and feel free to chime in, commenters. Up next, we'll take a quick break and then talk about finding farm work. BRB. Today's episode of Growers Daily is brought to you by Tilth Soil. Tilth Soil is a worker-owned co-op in Cleveland, Ohio, making NOP-compliant living soils for organic growers. Everything from Tilth is compost-based, and they divert around 4,000 tons of food scraps from landfills each year. I have used Tilth Soil for several years now for my plant starts. I love the results. I get consistent germination and consistent growth, plus excellent customer support. It's a lovably nerdy cast of folks who run Tilth. So start your season with excellent germination and strong transplants. Check out Tilth's pre-sale pricing for the 2025 season at tilthsoil.com. That's tilthsoil.com, and click Farmers. All right, back to the show. As always, if you, the listener, are enjoying this content, getting even a small amount of value from it, consider joining the nearly 850 people who support it over at patreon.com/no-till-growers, and I'll even answer your questions like a personal consultation live on air. Now, today's second Patreon question comes from Patreon member Anton Monreal, who writes, quote, "Hey, I am an aspiring German farmer. I did a season on a farm in Canada last year where I then met my girlfriend. We are going back for a full year to Canada in 2025, and I am starting my first real job search for a farm hand/manager position for the upcoming season. Since it's the time of year where also other like-minded people search for jobs, what do you think are the best ways and tools or tips to find a position in general or in the US/Canada? Love the show so far. My highlight when the winter grape pruning job gets really repetitive." End quote. Okay, great question, Anton, and this is a good time of year to be asking it. As you noted, because farmers are starting to gear up and are looking for seasonal, part-time, or full-time employees heading into the spring. First, going to farmers markets and chatting with growers and meeting them in person is an excellent way to find a good farm job. I know that may not be possible from Germany, but if you're already in Canada/the US, that is an option. Sometimes growers don't need a full-time employee, but perhaps can help you find a second part-time gig to fill in the hours. I often talk a lot of trash about social media sites. I'm guilty of that. Because they are awful for our brains. But I think Instagram still maintains a lot of value for information sharing, including when and if people are hiring. Follow as many farms as you can there and just check in on them regularly, maybe even send them a direct message. Also, feel free to use the forum at no-tillgrowers.com to put it out there that you're looking for work. We have a little section dedicated to connecting growers in that way. Now, I have never actually really worked for another farm myself. I did 2 years apprenticing, and although I wouldn't trade that education for anything, I don't recommend unpaid apprenticeships/internships because, one, some people do not get as lucky as I did and end up in quite exploitative situations. And two, a farm should be able to pay you for your labor. Otherwise, what you're ultimately learning is how to farm unprofitably with free labor. 1 year back in 2017, Hannah and I offered an unpaid apprenticeship. It felt horrible the whole time and did not go well for either party and ended early, and we have not done one since. You, the worker, should at least get a stipend, yes, beyond the room and board, for your work. But there are internships and apprenticeships that do that. So that could be an option for some, but for you, it sounds like you already have the experience. So I would maybe look for something a little bigger. So with that in mind, I also think that sending farms you want to work for your resume is not a bad idea. Even if a farm is not hiring, they can store your resume and maybe reach out if the job does come open. Sometimes it's just as hard for farmers to find the right kind of people as it is for farm workers to find the right kinds of farms. So they would probably be delighted to get your resume and at least have that on file. I remember when I was cooking, I sent my resume out to big name chefs in Louisville and then later in New York City. And I was stunned at how fast I got callbacks and were like, okay, let's set up an interview like right now. Can you be here today? Because, well, they were constantly needing good labor and many farms are in that same boat. Now, there are not as many jobs in farming as there are in like kitchens, but they still exist and farmers are going to be generally pretty excited to see someone with farm experience applying. There may be other websites that you can use that I'm not aware of in Canada and the US. And like I always say, don't hesitate to reach out to local ag organizations in regions where you want to work. They may know some farmers looking for workers or already have like some sort of site or shared spreadsheet or something that they could point you towards that you could find farm work. Otherwise, I'm super glad to hear you've been enjoying the show out there pruning vines, Anton. When I was working in wine sales, I always wanted to go work the harvest somewhere, but the timing never quite worked out. But I always thought that would be fun. Probably be some good podcast listening time out there harvesting and then pruning all winter. Glad we can be of service. All right, one last quick break, and when we come back, we will talk about drying greens. Be right back. All right, so we got a question from Patreon member Anna Hazen that I thought would be good to post now for anyone designing their wash pack station for the spring. Anna wrote, quote, after listening to a food safety related episode from earlier this fall, I would really like to hear how you or others make sure produce dries after washing. Fans, drip dry, what would be food safe, but also doable on a small scale? Thanks. Awesome. Thanks to you, Anna. So yes, when it comes to food safety, moisture is your enemy, or well, it's at least one of your enemies. And so when it comes to washing and packing produce, you definitely want to do everything in your power to get the produce pretty dry. So I'll go through what we use to get our greens dry and then talk about what I know others use and what even industrial folks use. So first, food safety starts with the quality of water. We use county water to wash our greens because it is already sanitary. If you were on a well, you would want to get some sort of sanitation additives like Sanidate tablets, which are honestly not a bad idea no matter what water you're using. You do not want to make anyone sick. But as soon as you introduce water, you run that risk. So good food safety starts with good, safe, cleaning water. Well, actually, it starts in the field, but that's for another time. What we do is that we wash the greens in 2 different tanks and then set them above an empty sink in perforated bins to drip dry for a minute while they wait for the salad spinner, which is a modified washing machine. In fact, modified by our interns from that year that I just mentioned. It's still going after 7 years, which is amazing. Now, you don't have to build your own if you like this one. And if you were like me, not mechanical, you can buy industrial spinners, which may be easier, albeit more expensive. The hand spinners are okay, just slow and will not do much volume, at least not efficiently. And they're quite a workout. So use those in the first year, perhaps, though they are not all that cheap. But I wouldn't think of a hand spinner as a long-term spinning solution. Anyway, we use that washing machine to spin dry lettuce greens, and then we dump them into another bin to dry a little bit more before packing them. Some folks go as far as fan drying them. I think there's nothing wrong with laying them out on a table and drying them with fans. It may add time and expense, but will increase food safety, which is always good. Forever, I have wanted to create a machine that is sort of like one of those cash grab booths, you know, that we used to see on game shows where you put the lettuce in and it just sort of blows around, and then you take it out and pack it. Like you could have it on a conveyor belt, so the lettuce goes into one side, blows around for a few minutes to get to the moisture off, and then lands back on the conveyor and drops out the other side into a bin. But at the moment, that doesn't exist, even though that would be very fun. So a drying rack is, albeit considerably more boring, fine. We detailed the wash pack station at Mountain Roots Farm on a video earlier this year that I will link in the show notes. The farmer there, our buddy Paul Wargo, broke down his wash pack and shows his simple drying and fan screen at the end. Again, I have no issues with that sort of, table to dry them on. If you have the space and time, build one. I'm not sure if it's essential, but I think there is no harm in going the extra mile when it comes to food safety. For industrial processors, what they are doing, based on what I can find online, is that they are mixing the greens, washing them using special tools to get bugs out, which, jealous, then running them through an industrial spinner, similar to how we do, but nicer and probably a little bit more efficient. Now, the large-scale systems I've seen do not use a drying screen, but I'm sure something like that exists. And feel free, commenters, to let me know if you've seen one, like a video or a post about industrial processor methods of drying greens involving a screen or fans of some sort. That'd be interesting. The risk of dehydrating the lettuce on a screen is pretty low, as long as you don't leave them there for too long, but it will likely increase food safety and potentially storageability of greens, so it's at least worth considering. Now, I've heard some producers say, especially in areas where they don't get heavy rains that can splash mulch and dirt onto the greens, that they try not to wash them at all. And maybe you can do this in a tunnel. I've never been able to do this really. It's just too buggy and dirty here. Like, I have earthworms and spiders in my lettuce. I could never get away with it, but I could see a path where your overhead irrigation is keeping them from getting too dusty or muddy, and then you can just harvest and pack them afterward without having to wash them. I could see that happening. Anyway, I hope all that is helpful. I'm going to end it there. Everyone have a great rest of your Wednesday, and I will be back tomorrow to hang. Huge shouts to Willie Breeding for the theme music, and to the team at No-Till Growers for their support, and to Epidemic Sound for the background music, and all the people that create music over there. Big thank you, as always, to everyone over at patreon.com/no-till-growers, where, at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, or if you just sign up in the month of December, you get a shout out on the show. So big shout outs today to, we've got some weeklies, to Maina, Byron Green, Stephen Smith, and James Tiedemann. James Tiedemann. Yeah, that works. This one is actually a From Another World. This story is a movie from another world, and the world is mostly bears and tigers, and they just have regular, they just live in cities and normal things, and it's like the bears and the tigers. And their sports teams, though, are where it gets interesting, because they're all named after either types of lizards or some birds, or just called the humans. Anyway, thanks for watching and or listening. We'll see you tomorrow.